The year was fading toward winter when the carriage rolled up the long dirt road to Everin Manor. The estate crouched on the hill like an animal that had forgotten how to breathe. Its roofline hunched, its windows blind with dust. The last servant to remain on the grounds waited at the door with a lantern, its weak flame trembling against the wind. Inside the carriage sat Lord Everin, the land's newest inheritor, his black coat heavy with travel dust and resentment. Across from him, thin hands rested on a small wooden box, the only possession of the quiet figure beside him, a boy of pale complexion, hair white as moonlight, eyes like watered milk. Locals in the neighboring village had whispered about the boy long before the carriage arrived. Some said he had been born under an eclipse. Others claimed he could not stand in sunlight without fainting. They called him Elior. When Everin first looked at him, it was not pity that stirred in the man's heart, but curiosity. The cold, analytical interest one might show toward an unusual specimen. The boy's stillness made him seem carved from wax. When he spoke, his voice was so soft that even the horses outside seemed to pause to listen. "I will serve, my lord," Elior said, eyes lowered. The master only nodded. His mind was still filled with the scent of the manor's stale corridors, the unpaid debts that had driven him to purchase cheap labor from a trader passing through. But there was also something else, an unspoken sense that the boy brought with him a shadow heavier than his frail frame could carry. The carriage stopped. The door opened to a gust of rain and the smell of old stone. Everin stepped out first, boots sinking into the mud, then turned to the boy. "Follow closely. The ground is uneven." Elior obeyed, clutching the small box to his chest as if it contained his heartbeat. They entered the manor together. The interior greeted them with silence. Dust motes drifted through the air like ghosts, disturbed by new breath. Furniture stood draped in linen sheets, the shapes beneath hinting at forgotten lives. From somewhere deeper within the house came the groan of settling timber. Everin lifted a candelabrum, lighting it with a match that hissed like a serpent. The yellow glow carved tunnels through the dark. "You'll sleep near the kitchen," he said. "You rise before dawn, clean and prepare the fires." "Yes, my lord." When the candlelight touched Elior's face, Everin noticed the faint shimmer of his skin, almost translucent, and the veins beneath that seemed drawn in silver ink. The master turned away quickly, unsettled by his own unease. As the hours passed, the storm worsened. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind pried at the shutters. Somewhere in the upper floors, the echo of a door slamming carried down the staircase. The manor, long uninhabited, sounded alive again, though not in a way that brought comfort. Everin poured himself a measure of brandy in the study, staring at the empty portrait frames that still lined the wall. His father's stern eyes were gone. The canvas had been cut out years before. He wondered briefly whether the villagers' mutterings about curses were merely an excuse for poverty, or whether there truly was something sleeping beneath these stones. From the corridor came the faint scrape of movement. Elior was kneeling by the hearth, trying to coax the damp logs to flame. The firelight revealed his hands, delicate, scarred from work beyond his years. Everin watched him for a long moment, then said, "You need not be afraid of this place. It only remembers what we give it." The boy looked up. "And what have you given it, sir?" The question startled him. He had not expected the child to speak with such quiet gravity. "Too much," he said at last. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. For an instant, the lightning illuminated the glass panes, showing Everin's reflection beside the boy's, a dark figure and a pale one, briefly merged before vanishing back into shadow. Later, as the house settled into uneasy sleep, the master lay awake listening to the faint rhythm of the wind through the corridors. Each sigh of air seemed to shape itself into a word, half-formed, half-forgotten. In the distance, the cellar door creaked, though no one had gone near it in years. Downstairs, Elior could not rest. The air of the manor pressed against him like water around a drowning man. He sensed things moving just beyond sight, a pulse in the walls, a breath beneath the floor. He whispered a prayer in a language older than his memory, and somewhere deep below, something stirred in reply. When morning came, neither spoke of the sounds they'd heard. The master began his routines and the boy followed quietly, the echo of the cellar's breath still lingering at the edge of hearing. The house seemed to be waiting. Weeks passed under a sky that never cleared. The manor seemed to drink the grayness until even daylight felt like twilight. Lord Everin's days settled into a rhythm of solitude. Letters left unanswered, bills stacking on the desk, the echo of his own footsteps across endless corridors. The only constant sound was Elior's quiet work, scrubbing, polishing, tending the fires that never quite warmed the house. At first the arrangement was bearable. Everin could almost forget the boy's presence, except for the soft movements in the corner of his sight. But then came the string of small misfortunes. A mirror cracked without reason. The hound that guarded the gate fell ill and died by morning. A ledger caught fire, though no candle touched it. The villagers, already wary of Everin, began to mutter again. "The White One," they said. "He draws bad luck. You can feel it in the wind when he passes." Everin laughed when he first heard it, but laughter did nothing to ease the unease that coiled in him. Each night he found new scratches along the cellar door, as if the wood itself tried to speak. The boy, however, seemed untouched by fear. He moved through the gloom like someone who had always belonged to it. One evening, a storm swept over the valley. Rain beat against the roof like fists. Everin stood at the window of his late wife's chamber, staring at the distant lightning. Behind him the door creaked. Elior entered holding a tray of food. "You haven't eaten since morning," he said, voice barely audible above the thunder. Everin turned slowly. "You came here of your own will?" "I was told to serve, my lord." The man studied him, the flicker of the candle throwing wild shadows across the boy's pale face. "Do you believe what they whisper in the village?" Elior's eyes did not waver. "They fear what they don't understand." Something in that calm reply stung Everin's pride. He took the tray, set it down, then stepped closer until he could see his own reflection in those colorless eyes. "And what am I to understand?" he asked. "That my fortune dies as soon as you cross my threshold?" "I bring only what you invite," Elior said. For a heartbeat, the master thought he saw movement behind the boy, just a ripple in the candle's shadow, like a second shape standing where none should be. He blinked, and it was gone. That night, the storm claimed the last of the household staff. The old cook fled, swearing she'd seen a figure walking the corridor that led to the cellar. By morning, only Everin and the boy remained in the house. The emptiness magnified every sound, dripping water, doors breathing in their frames, whispers that slid along the walls. Everin began keeping the cellar key in his pocket, though he could not recall when or why he'd taken it. Days later, tragedy struck again. The portrait of Lady Everin, the one untouched relic of gentler times, fell from its hook and shattered. The glass sliced through the master's palm when he tried to lift it. Blood dotted the painted face like a new signature. He rounded on Elior. "You were in this room," he hissed. The boy shook his head. "I wasn't, my lord." But the denial only deepened Everin's certainty that unseen forces were moving against him. Feverish from the wound and sleepless nights, he began to see shapes in every corner, pale faces pressed against the window panes, hands reaching from beneath the staircase. Always pale, always watching. On the third night of the fever, he heard singing, a lullaby, thin as cobweb. It came from the cellar. Lantern in hand, he descended the narrow stairway. The air smelled of damp earth and iron. The song ceased when he reached the door. His reflection trembled in the brass of the key as he turned it. Inside stood Elior, head bowed, as though he had been waiting. "What are you doing here?" Everin demanded. "I followed the voice," the boy whispered. "It called to me. There is nothing here but stone and rot." The master's shout echoed down the corridor, answered by a faint hum from the walls themselves. For an instant, both felt it, the pulse beneath the floor, the slow heartbeat of something buried deep. Everin slammed the door. The echo rolled through the manor like thunder. His own voice came again, rough and final. "You will stay until the curse leaves this place, until I am free of you." He slid the bolt. Elior's first words through the wood were calm. "The house will remember. The master stumbled back, lantern shaking in his grasp. In the sudden hush, he heard the rain begin again above them, harder than before, washing over the roof like a river trying to erase the stone. Upstairs, Everin poured brandy into a glass and stared at the flame's reflection in its surface. The silence from below was absolute. He told himself he had done what any rational man would do to contain madness, to protect his home. Yet the stillness pressed against him until he could not tell whether it came from the cellar or from his own chest. When he finally extinguished the lamp, a whisper drifted through the floorboards, soft enough to make him doubt it was real. Until you are free of yourself. The first days passed like the slow ticking of a distant clock. Then the seasons began to blur. Dust thickened on the stair rail. Ivy crept through the cracks of the shutters, and the great halls of Everin Manor fell into the kind of silence that feels alive. Lord Everin told himself he had done the sensible thing. The boy was safe below. He had food, water, air enough. Yet every night, as the wind moved through the chimneys, the master heard what might have been breathing beneath his feet. He added another bolt to the cellar door, then another. Weeks became months. The candle smoke that once drifted through the corridors faded to grey webs. The sound of footsteps vanished except for his own. When he passed a mirror, the reflection startled him, the eyes too hollow, the hair too white with worry. Below, Elior measured time by sound. Drops of water falling from the ceiling struck a metal bowl with a rhythm that became his heartbeat. At first he counted the hours, then the days. After a while, numbers lost meaning. He sang quietly to himself, just to prove his voice still existed. He tried to keep the darkness orderly, marking scratches on the wall with a small stone, whispering the lessons he once knew by heart. But memory thinned. Sometimes, as he drifted between waking and dreams, he imagined other voices mingling with his own. "Do you hear them?" a whisper said one night. It wasn't his. He pressed his ear to the wall. Beneath the weight of stone, a murmur rolled, low, endless, almost kind. He thought it was water again, until the pattern of it began to form words. Forgotten. Forgotten. He stepped back, pulse trembling. "Who are you?" "Buried," it answered, "but never gone." After that, the whisper returned often. Always faint, always patient. It told him to listen, to remember the soil under his skin, to remember the pain that gave shape to the world above. When he wept, the voice hushed him like a mother quieting a fevered child. Upstairs, Everin grew thinner. He sealed the windows with boards, claiming the light hurt his eyes. The servants who came to deliver supplies found excuses to leave quickly. The master's house, they said, smells of graves. At night he sat before the locked door, drink in hand, telling the darkness that he meant no harm. "It is for your own good," he would mutter. Sometimes he thought he heard a reply, a soft laugh, or the echo of his own words returning changed. Years slipped by like this. Moss reached the roof tiles. Birds nested in the chimney. The village forgot his name. Elior's world shrank to stone and shadow. Yet inside that narrow space, something vast awakened. The whisper taught him how to breathe differently, how to feel the pulse of the earth itself. His sight adjusted until he could trace every grain of dust in the air. His skin grew cold, smooth as marble. Hunger no longer gnawed. It waited. The voice began to tell him stories, of the land before the manor, of the spirits that slept beneath the hills, of bargains sealed in darkness. It spoke of pain turned into power. Each word fell into him like a drop of ink spreading through clear water. Sometimes he tried to answer with prayers from his childhood. The prayers burned in his throat. Still he whispered them, and the unseen presence listened with a patience older than mercy. "Why do you help me?" he asked once. "Because you are already between worlds," it replied. "You only need to remember which side you belong to." Above, Everin's days collapsed into long hours of dread. He dreamed of the boy's face in the firelight, of eyes that glowed faintly blue. He woke drenched in sweat, convinced he heard footsteps behind the walls. He told himself the boy was dead. It should have been a relief. Yet sometimes, as he passed the cellar door, he felt a breath against the wood, as though something leaned close from the other side, listening to his heartbeat. The 12th winter since the locking began was harsher than any before. The roofs of nearby cottages split under the weight of snow. Everin lit every candle he could find, but the shadows only grew thicker, gathering in the corners like living smoke. He sat by the hearth, whispering names he had forgotten he knew. From beneath the floor came a low vibration deep as the turning of the sea. It rose and fell until the glasses on the shelves chimed. In the cellar, Elior stirred. The whisper was no longer separate from him. It moved with his breath, curled through his veins. He reached toward the ceiling, and the air bent slightly around his hand. Stone dust fell in lazy spirals, glowing faintly before fading back into dark. For the first time in years, he smiled. The sound of the smile, an exhale more than a word, carried up through the cracks in the floorboards. Everin froze, head tilted. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the soft reply, distant but unmistakable. "Still here." The master backed away from the door, clutching the empty lantern to his chest. He told himself the wind was playing tricks again. He told himself many things until the words no longer made sense. Time, in that house, ceased to move forward. The clock stopped. The seasons outside turned, but inside dust lay thick and undisturbed, as if the entire building were holding its breath. And somewhere beneath, the heartbeat of the buried thing, Elior, or what he was becoming, matched the slow, terrified rhythm of the man who had sealed him there. The years of darkness were nearly done. The waiting was almost over. The sound began like breath on glass, barely there, the hush that comes before a word is spoken. Elior sat against the wall, eyes open to the dark. He had stopped counting the days. The scratches he once made on the stones had blurred into one long scar. The air in the cellar had changed. It no longer felt stale but watchful, as though the space itself had turned its face toward him. He whispered a name that was not his own, unsure of where he had heard it. The syllables tasted of metal and earth. The whisper answered at once. "Now you remember." It was not a voice in his ear. It bloomed inside his chest, filling his lungs with a cold sweetness. The cellar around him dimmed further, the darkness thickening until he could sense depth in it, a shape waiting to be seen. Elior spoke again, voice trembling. "What are you?" "Something that was buried beneath their houses," it said, "long before they built their walls and called them homes. I am the weight under the stones, the echo that never fades." He closed his eyes. "Why speak to me?" "Because you are made of silence," the thing murmured. "Because he gave you to the dark, and the dark remembers gifts." The air pulsed with a low hum. The mortar between the stones shimmered faintly, lines of pale light tracing veins through the walls. He lifted his hand. The glow followed his movement like water drawn to thirst. For the first time he saw his own reflection in the puddle near his feet, skin luminous, eyes faintly lit from within. Above him, the floorboards creaked. Lord Everin had begun pacing at night, muttering to himself. He had burned every portrait, every scrap of his family's crest. Yet still he heard that soft humming through the boards. He poured salt along the thresholds, hung iron at the doors. The house ignored his rituals. In the cellar, Elior's fear had been replaced by a slow wonder. The whisper taught him small things first. How to move without sound, how to sense the vibration of living blood in the walls above, how to call the rats and send them away again. When he touched the stones, the damp faded beneath his fingers. "Each cruelty leaves a door," the voice told him. "You have learned where yours lies." He pressed his palm to the wall. The surface gave slightly like flesh. For an instant, warmth spilled through the contact, a memory of sun, of grass beneath bare feet, of the world he had lost. Then it turned cold again, and he drew back. Everin dreamed that night of footsteps descending the stairs. In his dream, the door was open, and a pale figure stood on the lowest step, eyes like the reflection of moonlight on a frozen pond. He woke screaming, the echo of it rolling through the empty house. Morning brought no comfort. The mirrors had clouded, and on every pane of glass there appeared the faint outline of a hand pressed from the inside. The marks vanished when he blinked, but their chill remained. He tried to open the cellar door to prove it was still locked. The key turned halfway, then refused. From beyond the door came a sound like laughter, muffled by water. He stumbled back, dropping the lantern. The glass shattered, flame hissing out on the damp floor. In the darkness below, Elior felt the tremor of fear ripple through the wood. The whisper laughed softly. "He hears us now. Will you harm him?" Elior asked. "Not I," it said. "You will." He shook his head. "I am not what you are." Not yet. That single phrase uncoiled inside him, filling the narrow space with a slow, burning heat. He realized the voice was not outside him anymore. It spoke through his pulse, his breath, the steady rhythm of his heart. When he looked again at the puddle, his reflection blinked a moment later than he did. The delay frightened him, but also fascinated him. The reflection smiled first. Above, Everin sat in the library, surrounded by books he could no longer read. Every page looked the same, lines of grey ink sliding into shapes that reminded him of veins. He drank until the words blurred completely. Somewhere beneath the floor, a single note of sound began to rise, a tone too low for human instruments. It vibrated the glass of his bottle, then faded. He whispered to the emptiness, "If you are there, forgive me." From the cellar came a quiet reply, "I will remember." For days afterward, the master avoided the lower halls. He took to sleeping in a chair beside the fire, a pistol on his knee. Yet sleep still found him, and in sleep the same dream. The pale boy standing amid the roots of the house, light pouring from his eyes, mouth open in a silent song. In the cellar, Elior no longer slept. His body no longer ached, his hunger long forgotten. The whisper's presence surrounded him like a tide. He began to feel the boundaries of the manor above, every beam, every nail, every trembling breath of the man who had once been his lord. The house had become part of him, or he of it. When he spoke now, the stones answered in chorus. Dust fell from the ceiling soft as snow. "What do you want of me?" he asked. "Only that you stand when called," the voice said. "The 12th year is nearly done. The door will open." Elior raised his eyes to the ceiling, where faint light traced the outline of a human shape on the boards above. He touched the place gently, and the wood beneath his fingers warmed, almost like skin. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. The whisper fell silent, leaving only the slow pulse of the earth to fill the void. Elior closed his eyes and waited for the next breath, knowing it would not be his alone. The winter that followed carried no snow, only fog thick enough to erase the edges of the world. It clung to the windows of Everin Manor like breath against glass, sealing the house inside its own dream. Lord Everin awoke each morning to a silence that felt practiced, deliberate. He would light the fire, pour brandy into his tea, and tell himself the sound he heard below, the faint rhythm like a slow heartbeat, was the house settling, nothing more. Yet every day the pulse grew louder. He stopped leaving his estate. The villagers who once delivered supplies found the gates locked and the path overgrown. Sometimes they glimpsed him at an upstairs window, motionless, a candle flickering behind his shoulder. They began to speak of him as a ghost, already dead. Inside, Everin wandered from room to room like a man searching for proof that he still existed. The portraits had been burned, but the walls showed faint silhouettes where frames had hung for generations, a pale echo of lineage. He would trace those outlines with his fingers, muttering names he could barely recall. At night, he wrote letters addressed to no one. "Forgive me." It was meant as protection. He was only a child. But by morning the ink had smeared, the paper damp with condensation from the ever-thickening mist. The cellar key never left his pocket. He touched it constantly as if the small shape of metal could anchor him to reality. Sometimes he heard footsteps pacing below, slow and deliberate. Other times he heard laughter that was not quite human, as though the walls themselves were learning how to mimic joy. One evening, after too much drink, he stood before the locked door and whispered, "Are you alive?" The reply came softly from the other side, in a voice both familiar and strange. "More than you." He stumbled back, heart hammering. The words had been clear, too clear to dismiss as memory. For the first time he wondered if the house had become a mouth and the cellar its throat. Days blurred. He slept rarely. When he did, He dreamed of corridors narrowing into darkness, of pale hands brushing the edges of his coat. In one dream he descended into the cellar and found it empty except for a mirror. When he looked into it, he saw not the boy but himself, thin and hollow-eyed, whispering to the reflection as if begging it to wake. He woke shouting, the echo rattling the window panes. The following morning, frost appeared on the inside of the glass, though the fire still burned. Patterns like veins crept across every surface, delicate silver spreading from a single point above the cellar door. When he touched one line, it pulsed faintly, as if alive. He tried to scrub the marks away, but they reappeared by nightfall. Soon they covered the walls, curling into shapes that resembled letters from a forgotten script. He refused to read them, yet he could not stop seeing them. The air itself began to taste of earth. Sometimes he heard his name whispered from the fireplace, from the water basin, from the hollow of the stairs. Each whisper carried warmth and sorrow, as though someone pitied him from the other side of existence. He shouted into the silence, "What do you want?" The house answered with a sound like distant thunder, then nothing. By the 10th year, Everon's reflection no longer matched his movements. He noticed it first in the parlor mirror, a hesitation, a fraction of a second when the reflected hand did not follow his. He covered the mirror with a sheet, but the fabric bulged outward, as if something underneath continued to breathe. The more he tried to ignore the cellar, the more it claimed his thoughts. The floorboards above it grew warm, humming faintly at night. Once he pressed his ear to the wood and heard a heartbeat that matched his own until suddenly it did not. He stopped counting the days. Candles guttered faster, refusing to last the night. The brandy tasted of ashes. The fog outside thickened until even the gardens disappeared. One morning, he woke to find the key missing from his pocket. Panic rose in his throat like smoke. He searched every drawer, every coat, even beneath the hearthstones. It was nowhere. Then he heard the lock turn below, slow and deliberate. He froze. The sound echoed through the house, then ceased. No footsteps followed, only the long sigh of air drawn through a newly opened space. For hours he sat motionless, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The stillness itself became unbearable, louder than any noise. As dusk bled into night, he poured the last of his brandy and whispered, "If you must come, come now." The candles flickered, and in the brief darkness between one heartbeat and the next, he thought he heard a voice at his ear, not from the cellar, but from inside his skull. "I have always been here." The glass slipped from his hand and shattered. He did not pick it up. He simply stared into the embers until they blurred, wondering if the heat on his face came from the fire or from the breath of whatever had just spoken. Outside, the fog began to move against the windows, coiling like a living thing. The 12th year was drawing near. The house had learned to breathe. Each dawn, a faint exhalation moved through the corridors, lifting the dust as if the walls themselves sighed with relief that another night had passed without collapse. Lord Everon rose to that sound and listened, uncertain whether it came from wood, stone, or something hidden in the marrow of the place. 12 years had come and gone since the cellar door closed. No one called the manor home now but him. The garden had withered to black stems. Ivy crept across the windows like a blindfold. The world beyond the gates forgot his name, but the house remembered. He marked the date on a torn scrap of parchment, the anniversary, and set it on his desk as one might leave an offering. His hand trembled as he wrote the single word beneath the number, "Forgive." That evening, the fog returned, heavier than before, pressing against the glass until the panes groaned. The fire would not stay lit. The air grew damp and cold. Somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, a rhythmic tapping began. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats again. Everon followed the sound to the hallway above the cellar. The air there was warmer, almost feverish. When he placed his palm to the door, it pulsed faintly beneath his skin. "Not tonight," he whispered, half plea, half command, but the tapping answered, steady and patient, as though keeping time with his heartbeat. He turned away, yet the echo followed him through the night. No matter where he stood, it seemed to come from the floor beneath his feet. Sleep deserted him. In its place came visions, not dreams but flashes between blinks. A corridor of roots stretching downward, a pale figure kneeling in a pool of black water, a face half formed from light, half from shadow. When he opened his eyes, those images clung to the edges of his sight like after-images of lightning. By the third night, the fog had seeped inside. He awoke to find it pooling in the corners of the room, faintly luminescent, pulsing in rhythm with the same slow beat. He whispered a prayer he no longer remembered in full, and the air shivered in reply. Then came the voices. At first they were small, fragments of laughter, sighs, the creak of a stair when no one walked upon it. But soon they began to form words. Open the door. See what you made. Set him free. Everin pressed his hands to his ears until the skin bruised. He shouted into the fog, I gave you shelter. I kept the curse from spreading. The voices stilled. Then one answered, soft and clear, the same tone that had once begged him for mercy 12 years before. Shelter, it said. You buried me alive. He stumbled back, striking the wall. The cellar door behind him rattled once, then fell silent. From that night forward, the house began to change. The mirrors no longer showed him at all. The clock stopped. Water dripped upward from the floor to the ceiling. Even the fire burned with a pale, colorless flame. He wrote in his journal, half confession, half ledger of fear. Something moves beneath the boards. Sometimes I feel its gaze behind the walls. I think it wears my guilt like a mask. Outside, thunder rolled across a sky without rain. The sound seemed to come from beneath the earth rather than above it. He wandered the halls, whispering apologies to no one. Dust gathered on his shoulders like snow. In the great hall he found footprints, bare, wet, leading from the front door toward the cellar stairs. He followed them until they vanished halfway down, swallowed by the darkness. That night, the whisper returned. Not the multitude of voices, but the one he remembered most. Calm, familiar, almost kind. From the depths came an answer, low and distant, but clear enough to reach his bones. Not anymore. The wind that followed extinguished every candle in the house. Everin stood alone in the dark, trembling. Behind him the fog began to pour down the stairs, pulled toward the open cellar like a tide returning home. And somewhere far below, something stirred, stretching, unfolding, after 12 years of silence. The 12th year had come to an end. The awakening had begun. By the 12th year's end, the cellar was no longer a room. It had become a womb of shadow and memory, breathing softly beneath the ruined floors of Everin Manor. The walls glistened as if alive. The air pulsed with the rhythm of something ancient, remembering its own heartbeat. Those who later studied the legend wrote that the house itself seemed to tilt, imperceptibly toward the earth, its foundations drawn down by a weight unseen. They said the ground beneath the manor was warmer than the soil around it, as though fire slept beneath stone. Lord Everin felt that warmth each night now. It rose through the boards, spreading beneath his bare feet like fever. He dared not go below, yet he could not look away from the stairwell that gaped open in the hall. From its depths came a low hum, neither voice nor wind, but the steady vibration of power gathering form. They say that in his final journal, Everin wrote, "The cellar breathes in rhythm with me. When I sleep it dreams, when I wake it watches." Beneath him, Elior moved, not as flesh moves, but as thought does when it realizes it can reshape the world. His years of silence had condensed into something tangible, light, thick as blood, drifting like mist, forming the outline of a man who was and was not. The stones whispered in languages older than prayer. He remembered everything. The day the door closed, the smell of the iron lock, the way light died in his hands. And he remembered the voice that had filled the endless nights, soft, patient, offering strength where hope had gone. Now that voice spoke once more, quieter than a sigh. "You are no longer prisoner. You are inheritance." Elior opened his eyes. In that moment the house shuddered. Candles upstairs flared blue, then went out. Lord Everin staggered to his desk, clutching his chest. Through the floor, he felt the pulse of something vast rising, like the sea turning in its sleep. He whispered, "God help me." Though he no longer knew which god might listen, a faint light seeped up the stairwell, silver and trembling. Everin stood at the landing, staring down. The glow was not firelight, but something colder, purer. It revealed the shape of the stones, the grain of the wood, and in its heart, a figure. Pale, silent. Elior's face was half shadow, half radiance. His eyes no longer reflected the world. They absorbed it, drawing in color and warmth until only grayscale remained. Everin spoke, his voice cracked with disbelief. "You live?" Elior tilted his head, the motion deliberate, almost curious. "Do you?" The words echoed through the halls, carried by the air itself. Paint peeled from the walls where his voice passed. The temperature dropped. Frost bloomed across the portrait's empty spaces. "I waited," Elior said, each syllable measured. "The dark fed me what you left behind, fear, guilt, the rot of your name." Everin fell to his knees. "I was wrong. I thought you cursed." "You were right," Elior interrupted softly. "You made me so." He stepped forward, and the light moved with him, flowing across the floor like water finding its path. The timbers groaned as though bowing beneath unseen weight. "Why come now?" Everin whispered. "Because time is full," Elior answered. 12 years for 12 wounds. The debt ripens." Some chroniclers of the Everin estate claim that at this moment the fog outside turned inward, sliding through the cracks of the old windows, coiling down the stairwell to join the light. To the servants who had once fled, the manor appeared to glow faintly from within, as if a second sunrise had blossomed under its foundations. Inside, Everin's voice faltered to a whisper. "What are you?" Elior's reply was almost tender. "What you buried." The sound that followed was not a scream, but a sigh that lasted too long, as though the house itself exhaled centuries of grief. Books fell from shelves. Doors swung open and closed without hands. Dust rose like smoke, and in its swirl shapes moved, faces of those forgotten servants, kin, and wanderers swallowed by the estate's long silence. Each figure turned toward Everin, not with malice, but with recognition. He stumbled backward. "I cannot undo it," he said. "I would if I could." Elior watched him, neither advancing nor retreating. "Then bear it. The house remembers mercy as well as cruelty." He lifted his hand, and the light dimmed to a soft pallor. The faces faded, the air stilled. Only Everin remained, trembling in the grey half-glow. "Do you wish to live?" Elior asked. Everin closed his eyes. "Not as I have." "Then listen." The word struck deeper than any blade. The floor beneath Everin's knees grew warm, almost kind. For a heartbeat, he felt what Elior had felt. The isolation, the hunger, the unending dark. When he opened his eyes, tears traced the dust on his cheeks. "I see you now," he whispered. Elior's expression softened, the faintest echo of the boy he had once been. "Then you understand what comes next." Above them, thunder cracked, though the sky was clear. The manor's chandeliers swayed, scattering prisms of cold light across the walls. A wind moved through the halls, carrying with it the scent of rain on stone and something older, renewal hidden inside ruin. What happened next is uncertain. Some accounts say the master fell where he knelt, his heart stilled by revelation. Others claim he rose and followed the pale figure down into the cellar, and that neither was seen again. But those who pass the ruins today speak of a sound on quiet nights, a steady rhythm, like two breaths drawn together and released as one. They say the house sleeps now, not in anger but in uneasy peace, as though waiting for the rest of the world to remember what it forgot beneath its own foundations. And in the oldest part of the earth, beneath ivy and stone, something still listens, half human, half memory, guarding the silence that gave it birth. The storm that wasn't a storm gathered above the manor. No lightning, no rain, only pressure heavy as remorse. The air trembled in the chimneys. The fog outside swirled in slow circles drawn toward the house as if by breath. Inside, time no longer moved straight. The grandfather clock in the corridor ticked backward, then stopped. Candles leaned toward the cellar door, their flames bending in unison. Lord Everin stood at the landing again. The light from below had steadied into a pale shimmer that cast no shadows. Every step he took toward it sounded muffled, as if the house did not wish to wake whatever waited. Halfway down the stairs, he stopped. The cellar yawned open before him, no longer small, no longer bound by walls. It looked wider, deeper, as though the earth itself had bowed outward to make room for what had come back. Elior waited there, perfectly still. The glow that surrounded him was softer now, like moonlight filtered through deep water. "You returned," Everin whispered. "I was never gone," Elior said. His voice held neither rage nor mercy, only certainty. "You sealed me in, and the house sealed you with me. We have been circling each other ever since." The words hung between them, too heavy to fall. Everin descended the last few steps, each creak of wood sounding like the toll of a bell. "What do you want of me?" "Truth. I have written it." "Confession is not truth," Elior answered. "It is fear pretending to be forgiveness." The master's hands shook. "Then tell me how to make it right." Elior looked up at him, and for a heartbeat Everin saw the boy he had purchased, a servant with eyes too gentle for the world. "You cannot make right what was built on wrong," Elior said. "But you can end it." "How?" "By listening." The cellar vibrated softly. Voices began to rise, not screams, not moans, but memories. The echo of the wife who had died, the servants who had vanished, the laughter that once filled these rooms. Every sound wound itself through the air like smoke. "They are all here," Elior said. "Every cruelty echoes until it finds an ear willing to hear." Everin sank to the ground. "I hear them." "Then you understand what the house has become, a monument to silence." He nodded, tears streaking through the grime on his face. "If I open myself to it, will it stop?" Elior stepped forward close enough that the light brushed the master's cheek. "It will change." Everin closed his eyes. "Then take it." The air drew in sharply. The glow pulsed once, twice. For an instant the cellar filled with the sound of heartbeats overlapping, a chorus of every life tied to the manor. Then quiet. When Everin looked again, he was standing not in the cellar but in a field. Morning light lay over ruined walls. Ivy crawled through broken stone. He realized it was the same house years gone, stripped to its bones. In the distance, a child's laughter drifted on the wind. Elior stood beside him, expression calm. "This is what remains when the weight is lifted. Am I dead?" "Not yet," Elior said. "You're being remembered." The vision faded and the cellar returned, though smaller now, its shadows thinner. Everin's knees touched the dirt floor. He felt lighter, almost transparent. "Will you go?" he asked. Elior looked upward, where the faintest trace of daylight seeped through the cracks. "The house will sleep. The past will sink deeper. But memory never leaves. It only changes its voice." Everin reached out, uncertain whether the hand before him was flesh or light. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." And with those words the glow receded. The walls exhaled. The fog outside began to drift away, as though its work were done. When the silence settled, Lord Everin was alone again. The cellar looked ordinary. Stone, dust, a single gutted candle. Only the faint outline of footprints remained, leading toward the far wall where earth met brick. He followed them until they vanished. There he placed his palm against the cold stone and whispered, "Rest." The wall warmed beneath his touch, then cooled. Later, no one knows how much later, the villagers found the manor empty. The doors stood open. The garden bloomed despite the season. On the floor of the great hall lay an old journal. The final entry read, "The house has forgiven itself. So must I." Some claimed they saw that night a pale figure standing at the edge of the woods, facing east as dawn approached. Others said it was only mist caught in the rising sun. But for those who still tell the story, that was the hour the Everin curse ended, the moment when guilt finally found its voice, and silence at last could sleep. By the time dawn bled through the fog, Everin Manor was no longer a house but an echo. The walls stood, yet something inside them had shifted, subtle, inevitable, like a body finally exhaling after a century-long breath. The villagers who ventured near that morning spoke of a faint hum in the earth. It came from the foundations, a sound halfway between music and heartbeat, rising and falling with the mist. Birds would not land on the roof. Even the ivy hesitated to climb. Below, in what had once been the cellar, air drifted through newly opened cracks. The light there changed with each breath of wind, sometimes white, sometimes blue, as if the house were inhaling the sky itself. Elior's presence lingered, felt rather than seen. He was the house now, its memory given form. Where cruelty had once lived, something colder and more patient had taken root, justice, shaped by years of silence. They say that on that day, Lord Everin walked the corridors one last time. Each step left faint ash prints that smouldered, then vanished. He spoke to the walls as one might to an old friend. "I will not run," he said. "Let it be finished." The fog thickened in reply. The chandeliers swayed. From somewhere deep within the timbers came a low note, long and mournful, vibrating through stone and bone alike. Every door opened at once. A rush of wind swept through the manor, carrying with it the scent of earth after rain, and beneath it faintly, the smell of iron and old parchment. The journals, the portraits, the relics of pride and lineage lifted from their places, turning weightless for a heartbeat before disintegrating into dust. The house was erasing its history. Elior's voice, soft as wind over glass, whispered through the ruin. What was built on pain must return to earth. Everin did not plead this time. He bowed his head, then let it return. The floor beneath him trembled. Beams cracked, plaster split along the seams of long-buried sins. Yet there was no collapse, no flame, only release. The very air seemed to loosen, freeing the trapped breath of years. Outside, villagers watching from the hill saw a column of light rise through the roof, white at first, then fading to grey. When it dissolved, the manor still stood, but smaller somehow, emptied. Its windows gaped like open eyes, finally at peace. Those who entered later found no sign of the master. Only his cane remained propped beside the cellar door. The wood was warm to the touch, though the air around it was cold. In the cellar, a new stillness reigned. The walls no longer wept with damp. The stones gleamed faintly, etched with patterns resembling tree roots or veins of silver. Where the lock had once sealed Elior away, a single word was now carved into the lintel. Remember. Scholars of the region would later argue about what happened next. Some claimed Everin's spirit merged with the house, becoming its conscience. Others believed Elior, in his final act of vengeance, granted his master the mercy of dissolution, letting him fade into the quiet he had once denied another. But those who lived nearest told a simpler tale. They said that on stormless nights the manor glows faintly from within, and two voices can be heard speaking low, one weary, one serene. The conversation always ends the same way. Are we forgiven? Almost. In the years that followed, nature reclaimed the estate. Moss spread over marble. Ivy sealed the gates. Travelers avoided the path not out of fear but reverence. They called it the sleeping house. And in the archives of the nearby town, one clerk recorded a final note beneath the Everin family name. Property dissolved. Grounds uninhabitable. Atmosphere unusually calm. He underlined that last phrase twice, as though unsure why calm deserved attention. No one saw Elior again. Yet, in the hollow just beyond the ruins, a small spring appeared where none had flowed before. The water ran clear even in winter, and those who drank from it said it carried a strange taste, mineral, metallic, like a memory half remembered. Children grew up hearing the legend of the pale servant locked away, the master who sought absolution, and the house that punished itself into peace. To some it was ghost story, to others parable, but among the oldest villagers, the story was spoken softly, with the respect given to truth disguised as myth. For they said vengeance in the end was never a scream nor a strike. It was silence finally heard. Years passed. then decades, and Everin Manor became a ruin the forest tried to forget. The road leading to it vanished first, swallowed by moss and root. Then the iron gates bent inward, as if the earth itself wished to pull them down. In time, only travelers with no sense of direction ever found the path. Those who did said it always felt wrong, too still, too quiet, as if the air itself listened, but silence was not absence. It was memory holding its breath. The villagers nearby learned to speak of the manor only in daylight. At night, the mist rolled down from the hills and gathered near its boundaries, curling around the stones like a living thing. Some swore they saw faint lights flicker through the broken windows, soft, pale and pulsing in rhythm with the heart. Others claimed that if you stood long enough at the edge of the property, you could hear whispers underneath the wind, two voices calm, patient, finishing a conversation centuries old. The story of Lord Everin and the albino servant became local legend, retold and reshaped with every generation. Some called it the curse of the white child, others called it the house that listened, but most knew it by a simpler name, the debt. Old women would tell it to warn their children. Do not lock away what you fear, for it will grow in the dark until it learns your name. But historians, ever curious, tried to anchor the myth to fact. They searched old records, tax ledgers, parish archives, and there, half buried among forgotten accounts, they found proof. A family line that ended abruptly in the year the manor was said to have fallen silent. The name Elior appeared once, listed as house servant, unaccounted for. Nothing else. No birth record, no grave, just that single orphaned line. Yet in the decades that followed, strange reports continued. Shepherds spoke of a pale figure seen on misty mornings walking the tree line. Travelers lost on the moor claimed that a voice, soft, almost musical, guided them back to the road. And once, a group of children wandering too close to the ruins swore they saw light bloom from within. Warm and steady like a lantern. When asked what it looked like, one boy said, "It felt like someone wanted us to go home." No one else went near for a long while. The forest thickened around the estate, sealing it in like a scar over a wound. Then, near the end of the century, a scholar named Dr. Holden arrived from the city. He was writing a book about English estates that devoured their masters. He brought a camera, notebooks, and the calm arrogance of men who believe ghosts are only history, misremembered. He stayed one night. The villagers heard nothing until morning, when Holden stumbled into the village square, soaked, shaking, clutching his camera like a weapon. He refused to speak for days, but when he finally did, his words chilled the room. "The house is alive," he whispered, "and it remembers its name." The plates from his camera showed nothing but light, columns and spirals of it, emerging from darkness like breath on glass. In his notebook, the final line read, "Elior Everin." After that, no one else tried to study the ruins. In time, the legend took on a gentler shape. The manor became a landmark of caution, then of curiosity, and finally of reverence. Hikers who passed near it left small offerings at the forest's edge, stones stacked in threes, white feathers, scraps of parchment with written apologies. None could explain why. It simply felt right. Some nights, the fog that rolls down from those hills carries the faintest hum, deep and resonant, like the sound of a voice speaking through water. Locals say it's Elior, no longer vengeful but watchful, guardian of those who are wronged, judge of those who bury cruelty in silence. A century later, the site was surveyed by the Ministry of Heritage. Their report described the remains of a 17th century manor subsumed by forest growth, and concluded with an odd note, "Area unnaturally serene." Wildlife unusually calm. One inspector, in a private letter, confessed that during the survey he felt an overwhelming sense of being observed, but not with malice, rather with mourning. No reconstruction was attempted. The government declared the land ecologically sacred, and so the story faded back into folklore, where truth and myth hold hands, but sometimes late at night. When fog settles over the nearby village and the air smells faintly of rain and stone, an old caretaker of the parish church claims to see movement near the tree line, a faint pale shimmer drifting between the oaks. He swears it never comes closer, just stands there, as if ensuring the boundary still holds. When asked who he believes it is, the old man always answers the same way. It's the boy they called Cursed, and the master who learned mercy too late, both waiting for those who forget what silence costs. And then he adds almost kindly, "If you ever hear a whisper calling your name in the fog, answer softly. It might only be Elior, reminding you to remember." The wind through the hollow trees carries that name still, not as a warning, but as a promise. The house sleeps, but the memory watches.